Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining Grenzebach, Glier and Associates for the next webinar in our Fundraising in a Public Health Crisis Thought Leadership Series. My name is Jim McKey, and I am the Practice Area Leader for Independent Schools at GG+A. I would like to welcome our special guest today, Tom Moore, Director of Advancement at the Kinkaid School in Houston, Texas. Tom has happily agreed to join us today and share with us how he and his team at Kinkaid have been working through the challenging events of this last month. I am also joined by GG+A President Suzanne Hilser-Wiles and by Vice President Liz Farr, who also work with our school clients. We will start by sharing some observations from our client work and what the firm is seeing more generally in this new environment. We will share some advice on things your programs can and should be doing to move your schools forward. Now, as we get started, let me remind you that our conversation will go approximately 30 minutes to 1:30 Central Time. We warmly welcome questions for Tom or other panelists from any of our listeners. Unfortunately, we won't be able to take those questions live on the air, but we would ask you to please direct them to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Tom and the panelists have graciously agreed to try to address any questions you send in. It may take us a few days, but we will publish on our website both your submitted questions and the answers. Please take this moment to push your mute buttons to avoid any unwanted sounds. And now let's get started. All of 2020 has seemed challenging as we started to understand the implications of COVID-19 and the international pandemic. March was a very difficult month as all schools closed their physical campuses. Many juggled decisions around spring break. Some schools already have announced they will not reopen the campus this semester, while others are waiting to see what might be possible. Virtual learning replaced campus-based classroom learning. At the same time, we have seen markets decline steeply and unemployment begin to rise sharply. School leaders are worried about the impact of the situation on the current year financial aid requests and other financial implications for the school budget. Some schools have completed enrollment for next year, but all fear an impact on enrollment and financial aid. There has been a sharp focus on all parts of fundraising in schools, but especially on the annual fund, and depending on what stage a school finds itself in, on campaign strategy and execution. Fundraisers are questioning the timing and messaging of appeals and initiatives. Most are trying to communicate with their top supporters and volunteers. Virtual meetings have now become the norm for boards, for senior administrative teams, and for advancement staffs. Communications must rely on emails, electronic newsletters, and social media. Trustees bring differing perspectives about the climate and the future for their schools. The situation for faculty could not have been imagined, nor could the speed with which they have had to pivot the way they teach. Students are learning in new ways. They miss their friends, teachers, activities, and familiar surroundings. All of our constituents are experiencing disruption. Some have several family members all doing work at home and sharing Wi-Fi. Others, like younger and older alumni, might feel isolated and separated from their friends and family. We do not know the length or depth of this recession, but we do know from history that philanthropy bounces back. Americans are generous people now, and we expect them to be in the future. We see the periods of recession here in orange. The line below represents giving to education. That's giving to all of education, including schools and higher education. We note that giving recovered at a faster pace to education than giving overall. This data is from Giving USA. Another lesson we learned from 2008 and 9 was that many donors decreased the number of charities they supported. You should seek ways through engagement and communications to stay close to your best donors and stay high on their lists. In our firm's work with some of the most selective universities around the world, it is not uncommon to hear a donor say that their independent school or that of their children is among their top 3 charities. We want to try to keep it that way. I would now like to ask my colleague Suzanne Hilser-Wiles to share some steps we think you can and should be taking in this environment with your external audiences.
Thank you, Jim. First, we will review some externally focused steps you can be taking. Stay in touch with top donors and prospective donors. Thank them for their partnership. In fact, stewarding your current donors is the most important thing you can be doing right now. Engage your head of school, trustees, and key volunteers in the outreach. People want to hear from your leaders during this time of disruption and uncertainty. Continue to ask for gifts. So what do we mean by that? First, we encourage you to send scheduled pledge reminders. If there are donors about whom you are concerned, you might call them to let them know this is coming, consistent with their gift agreement. Or you may add language about contacting you if they need to discuss their payment schedules. But we shouldn't just assume that people aren't expecting to make these gifts. Second, check in with donors with whom you're in the middle of gift conversations. We know from speaking with clients over the last 3 weeks that many have closed significant gifts. Some donors are asking about extended pledge payment periods, and others are requesting a pause in the conversation. But in all of these examples, the institutions reached out to the donors to find out what was best for them. Finally, and I will get into this a little more deeply in a moment, we encourage you to be asking for annual gifts. Of course, you need to be mindful about what is happening in your school community. For example, the first week of remote learning is probably not the right time to reach out to your parent fund volunteers, but we believe you can and should be asking for annual fund gifts. Prepare yourself, your staff, and key leaders to answer, how can I help? You should maintain focus on the annual fund, and you don't need to apologize. The amazing thing is you're still running a school. This is a great time to remind people that the annual fund is a critical part of your school's financial model and what the annual fund does for your community. Without it, you would have to cut core programs because you rely on these dollars in your operating budget. Finally, consider the optics of continued fundraising or launching donor-supported projects. If you frame fundraising as essential to your school's financial health, then fundraising will make sense to your constituents. But again, make sure you are thoughtful about timing with other messages going out to your community, and be sure your school and volunteer leaders have the information they need to answer likely questions. This week, one of our school clients decided to move forward with breaking ground on the new building. They have secured restricted gifts to pay for it, and they have construction contracts they need to honor, so this makes sense. At the same time, they need to educate their board members and other volunteer leaders so that they can answer questions which will inevitably arise. As an example, they need to be able to explain why the school can't just take the dollars it is spending on this building and divert them towards the growing need for scholarship support. In short, we see transparent, regular communication as the key to not only maintaining, but also strengthening donor relationships during this time. Now I will turn it over to my colleague Liz Farr to talk about the internally focused steps you and your teams can be taking.
Thank you, Suzanne. In addition to the steps that Suzanne just talked about, which are geared toward keeping your donors engaged and giving, here are some ideas about activities the development staff can focus on during this time when our ability to meet with donors and hold events or meetings is diminished. Taking time now to analyze your school's recent fundraising performance, let's say the past 5 or 10 years, can illuminate the areas where your program is successful or needs improvement. Does the board carry the appropriate level, typically 25 to 35% of annual total private support at your school? Are leadership annual fund donors renewing but infrequently upgrading their gifts? Have the investments you've made in engaging young alumni reaped rewards in their giving? Knowing about where you are successful and where you need help, and sharing that information with the board, the head, and your colleagues will help identify where your program needs attention. Evaluating current programs. Frequently in school programs, we add and add and add and never take away. Are all the programs you're currently offering meeting their goals? Do they have goals? Is it time to redouble your efforts to ensure that the 6th grade parent pizza party is successful? Or is it time to discontinue it? Should you still be holding an annual alumni reception in Boston? Investigate these things now. Reviewing prospect screening results. Often we conduct these screenings of our constituents and put the results on a shelf or in some obscure section of our database. Now is a terrific time to dust off those ratings and ensure that frontline fundraisers are managing your school's top prospects, rather than the lovely but low capacity alumni who are always up for lunch. How are your protocols? Do you have a gift acceptance policy written or revised in the past 3 years? If a new staff member started tomorrow, could you point him to a document outlining your school's process for recording a prospect move? If not, this is the perfect time to write it all down. Have the systems for recruiting alumni weekend party hosts changed, but everyone was too busy to document the new procedure? Without the hubbub of being in the office, staff members may be better able to focus on these tasks. Finally, we all worry when we uncover a constituent whose child left the school last year, but whoops, we're still soliciting them by that child's grade instead of the younger child's. Now is a great time for database managers and advancement services professionals to perform quality control work aimed at ensuring the strength and integrity of your fundraising program's data. These are just a few suggestions. There are certainly more, but we urge you to make the most of this time. Now, it is my very great pleasure to spend a few minutes talking with Tom Moore. Among the clients with which I'm very proud to partner is the Kinkaid School in Houston, Texas. Kinkaid is a pre-kindergarten through 12th grade day school of nearly 1,500 students. Tom Moore has served as Kinkaid's Director of Advancement for almost 19 years and leads a team of 12. Please join me in welcoming Tom.
Thanks, Liz. It's great to be here.
Tom, you hold an annual stewardship event for your Founders Society members, Kinkaid donors who have given $7,500 or more. This year's event was on March 11th, the same day the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic. You still held the event, but tell me what you and your staff are doing now and in the immediate future to ensure the school's leadership donors remain engaged and supportive.
Liz, March 11th, coincidentally, was the day that Houston had its first local government response to the pandemic. The mayor canceled the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, the most well-attended and largest charitable event in our city. The rodeo is a huge deal, bringing 100,000 or so people together daily for 20 days, culminating with a large rodeo and concert in the evening. This year's performers included entertainers like Willie Nelson and Lizzo. Our stewardship event went very well on March 11th, although it was clear that people were concerned about what lied ahead for them and their families. 2 days later, we went on spring break. Like in most areas around the country, school has been closed ever since, with distance learning in place for our students. Once spring break was over, my team started working on an engagement plan. Over the last 10 days, my staff and I have been making stewardship calls to all our top and loyal donors and key volunteers, excluding, for the most part, current parents, so we're getting lots of communication from the school right now. I reviewed all assignments for appropriate matches between staff member and those they would be calling. During the calls, we ask how the person's family is doing during this crisis and offer an update on the school's response to COVID-19. These are not fundraising calls, these are stewardship calls. When we complete the calls this week, we'll have reached about 600 people. Every member of my staff is making these calls, even the new ones, even the support staff, and most importantly, we're documenting all of these moves in our database. My team is spending a lot of time on the phone. I can't overstate the importance of that, and I underestimated the amount of time it would take them when we first started this project. It's fun and exhausting, but welcomed and valued by our donors. Every market in the country has been impacted negatively by COVID-19. Houston is impacted differently than many areas because of our large presence in the oil and gas industry. Many of our leadership donors are in the energy field, and they're hurting because of the dropping price of oil. Others in commercial and residential real estate also are suffering. Staying in touch with our top donors now will help us in timing both stewardship and solicitation in the months ahead. I'd like to add that we had another leadership donor event planned for mid-April, and we decided to postpone it to the fall.
Wow, thank you, Tom.
Yeah.
My next question, the 2019-2020 goal for Kinkaid's annual fund, the Kinkaid Fund, is $3 million. In a recent conversation, you shared with me that you have about $500,000 more to raise in order to meet that ambitious goal. What are you doing to ensure that you do meet it? And how are you maintaining focus on the Kinkaid Fund without conflating it with other funds?
Well, this has been our top priority right now, Liz. Before the current crisis, we had a good plan and tactics in place. Even with the hiring of a new annual fund manager on March 1, I was feeling very confident as we were tracking to meet or exceed goal. I started at Kinkaid in 2001, so I have been here for major societal calamities such as 9/11, the stock market collapse in 2007 and 8, and Hurricane Harvey in 2017. Annual giving held up well in all those instances, as we have a large, loyal, and generous donor base. However, at this point, I'm thinking this pandemic will have a wider impact across our community, an impact that could have a larger negative impact on giving. Although I'm not sure that we'll reach goal, we're not panicking. Instead, we are pivoting by changing the timing of our appeals and modifying strategies. I'm spending more time focusing on ensuring annual fund success. As importantly, I'm working hard to manage expectations of the school leadership. I've been speaking regularly with the board, interim head of school, and our chief financial officer to let them know where we stand. Initially, we suspended our planned appeals for a few weeks, but now we're returning to them. For example, we'll be sending a live bunt, side bunt special mailing later this month, which typically secures many gifts. Also, I'm hopeful that our annual fund director, major gift officer, and I will be able to follow up with key live bunt prospects by phone in 3 to 4 weeks if things calm down with COVID-19. We currently also are planning some targeted email appeals later this month and into next month. To help us get close to goal, I already have talked with some key trustees about offering a challenge toward the end of this fiscal year. Our trustees are terrific. I've already received a favorable response from a couple of them about this possibility. At this point, I'm thinking of offering the challenge not only to those who have not made a gift this year, but also to many loyal donors who might make a second gift to help us reach goal.
Terrific. Tom, Kinkaid has a robust network of engaged, active, and helpful volunteers, including trustees, development committee members, parents, alumni, and many others. How are you and your team keeping those volunteers connected and assiduous during this time when activities such as in-person meetings, phone-a-thons, and engagement events simply aren't possible?
Well, Liz, obviously, I'm not getting to meet face-to-face, and I'm not going to resort to making asks online via Zoom or Microsoft Teams, at least not at this point. Prospects aren't going to be as willing to engage. Kinkaid is nowhere near the top of their priority list right now. Just like for all of us, many of the school's prospects are having to juggle working from home, others have a business in a challenging situation, and some have children engaged in distance learning, which is a major distraction at home. Nevertheless, like we're doing with our leadership and loyal donors, we're calling our fundraising volunteers to keep them engaged. This is an important time for us to benefit from their knowledge. For example, during one of my stewardship calls last week, an advancement committee member made an excellent recommendation. He suggested that rather than making an assumption about how a potential donor is doing during the crisis, that we ask our committee to review the list of outstanding prospects and share any special intel they have. This information will be very helpful. I'm hopeful that we'll still be able to approach many of these top prospects before our fiscal year ends on July 31st. As an aside, this is the first year that I'm happy our fiscal year ends at the end of July, so to give us a little more time. My view is that we've got to be flexible and show some grace. Things are just changing so fast. In the area of special events, we need to honor the work volunteers have already done and not just take the money they've raised without a proper celebration of their efforts. I know of a number of independent schools in Houston who had annual galas planned for March, and they've had to pivot to more online auction activity. Kinkaid did not have an auction scheduled for this year, but we did have a clay shoot scheduled for late March. This is a major fund and fundraiser for us and nets about $225,000 a year. After rodeo was canceled on March 11th, we moved the clay shoot to May. I figured a 6-week postponement would be sufficient. However, this past week, I could see that May was not going to be a possibility. So I called the event chair and discussed some options. We had a great visit. We could have decided to cancel the event. If we had, I bet that most of the underwriters and participants would have said, that's okay, keep the gifts we've made, because they understood that the pandemic is an unusual circumstance. If we canceled, we would have then formed a new committee early next year and asked pretty much the same group of supporters to give again. The tournament chair and I did not like the cancellation option. Instead, we've decided the event will be postponed to next March, with all the funds raised to be redirected to next year's event. We wanted the volunteers to feel that their efforts had been valuable. We didn't want the supporters to think that we took their donations for granted. We wanted to properly celebrate the honorary chair, his family and friends, at an actual event. I'm very pleased with the decision to show empathy and grace at this time.
Thank you. Tom, a moment ago, I took a quick scan of our participants on this webinar, and many of them are advancement leaders. Tell me about how you are leading and managing your team while everyone is working remotely.
Liz, that's a great question. First, I've reduced expectations, beginning with mine. There's no way I can be as effective working from home as I would have been from being at school and being out visiting with folks before the pandemic struck. My time on fundraising has been reduced because as a member of the administrative team, I'm spending an increased amount of time meeting on important school issues. There are virtual meetings, these are virtual meetings which are tiring too. I also am making sure that my wife and I take walks during the day to relieve the stress of sitting all day. Secondly, I've told my staff that my expectations of them are reduced and modified too. My staff face many of the same challenges that are facing our donor prospects. In fact, 8 of my staff have students at home, which reduces their work time during the day. One even has 4 children, with the oldest in 4th grade, and 3 of them are doing distance learning. I cannot imagine what a day is like. So trying to maintain a sense of normalcy now is vital. First, it's important that I do what I can so the staff can see each other regularly. We welcomed 2 new staff members in the past month who didn't even have a chance to develop any type of routine before the pandemic. So it's more important than ever to keep the team feeling alive. So I'm doing 2 Zoom check-in meetings each week with the whole team, and our staff members are working in groups between those meetings. I'm also having individual calls with staff members who are heading key projects, and I'm also letting my staff know that I'm available throughout the day to answer questions by phone or email. One way we have pivoted at this time is we're receiving gifts entirely electronically now. In the past, I signed and put a personal note on virtually all printed receipts, which were then mailed. The gift processing team now is creating receipts and posting them on our server in PDF form. I then email the PDFs with a personal note to each donor. Our supporters have appreciated the personal touch and the timeliness of our acknowledgments.
Thank you. And my final question, Tom, as we run out of time, is about the future at Kinkaid. One of the reasons you engage GG+A as a consulting partner is because Kinkaid is preparing for its next major campaign. With a primary component of the campaign being a large building project, the fundraising goal is likely to be between $125 and $150 million. Tell me about how school leaders and you are continuing and amending campaign planning in light of the pandemic and financial crisis.
Thanks, Liz. As you know, Kinkaid started with campaign planning in the fall of 2019. So today we're still in the early phases. When we started, our plan was to begin drafting our case statement this coming fall, test it with key community members early next year, conduct a feasibility study next spring, and approach the top prospects in a pre-silent phase about 15 to 18 months from now. We're still moving ahead in hopes of staying as close as possible to that timetable. Volunteers and staff had done a lot of work before COVID-19, so it's important that we not let that effort go to waste. The school's leadership wants to maintain momentum and keep the enthusiasm high for several reasons. The board believes it's really important to continue this work while we await the arrival of the new head of school on July 1st. And our head-elect, who has been reviewing our progress along the way, wants us to keep moving, perhaps at a slower pace, but to keep moving. A key part of the campaign is the efforts of the building committee, which continues to do its work and meets virtually each month in a Zoom call. The committee is engaged an architect and is reviewing designs for new upper school. Again, their pace has slowed some, but it hasn't stopped. If we stop the campaign planning work now, it will create a major lag in fundraising and construction planning. Any more delays would greatly disappoint our community, which is anxiously awaiting the key element of the campaign, the building of a new upper school building. The school also hired an educational consultant last year to help identify options for curricular offerings for the future, some of which are likely to be new or different from those we offer today. These options will be integrated in the final architectural plan. A key part of the consultant's work will be to report on the findings from a community survey. The survey was going to be launched a month ago, but was delayed once the pandemic was announced. The survey will be sent a week from today. So again, work continues in this important area, although with a small delay. In the early phases of campaign planning last fall, GG+A screened our donor base for capacity and inclination. One of the things that I will do shortly is assign the very top prospects to prospect managers. We will delay rating the prospects' giving potential for now because of all this economic uncertainty. But I feel it's very important to continue with making the assignments so when things turn around, there'll be a minimal delay in the next phase. Earlier this year, the board committed to allowing me to hire a new major gift officer. I was hoping to have this person on board by June 1, but I believe that hire date may be delayed a couple of months. So Liz, in conclusion, our office continues to follow the campaign plan GG+A and you laid out for us, the plan our board enthusiastically approved when you presented it last November. Our preparations are moving more slowly, but they continue. Your experience and your firm's experience with other schools tells me, and I fully agree, there is not a good reason to stop preparing now. If we did, a great deal of energy would be expended just to recreate any sense of momentum, energy that would be better spent and more productive if focused on moving ahead now. Our board and our community expect our campaign planning to proceed and understands it will be at a slightly slower pace. Thank you.
Tom, thank you for taking the time today to share your wisdom and insights with our independent school listeners and with all of us. We are so grateful for your time. Now I will turn things back to my colleague, Jim McKey.
Tom, I want to add my thanks. Those were important insights that you've shared, so thank you very much. We here at GG+A want to thank all of you for participating and being with us today, and trust that this was enlightening and helpful to you in your work. We will post a recording of today's webinar early next week. Please also stay tuned for additional content and webinars as we continue our series, Fundraising in a Public Health Crisis. Thank you very much.